Okay, so this is part 2, and we're going to talk about how that action potential actually happens. So this is the cell membrane of that axon, and the outside of the axon is more positive than the inside. And that's because the outside has a higher concentration of sodium. Sodium has that +1 charge. Okay, and the difference between the inside and the outside is -70. Okay, so if we get enough stimulus, so something stimulates this axon, if it's enough, it has to reach, the sodium channels will open, but you don't reach that threshold stimulus until you get to -55 millivolts. So -70 millivolts, and the threshold stimulus where you're actually getting an action potential is -55 millivolts. Okay. Once you have that action potential, once you read threshold potential, you're going to have an action potential, and that action potential travels down there, causing a positive 30 millivolt difference. Okay. Now, as the positively charged sodium rushes in, remember these things are going to want to be in equilibrium. That causes the potassium to rush out. Okay, to equalize that. And that's what helps to reset that depolarization, because this is depolarization up here. That's what helps to reset it, which is called repolarization. Okay. Eventually, we need to reset this membrane entirely, and that happens with something called a sodium-potassium pump. So the sodium K is potassium pump will reset that, and it has to do it through active transport, and it's going to pump for every 3 sodiums that it pumps out. For every 3 sodiums that get pumped out, pumped in. For every 3 sodiums that get pumped in, 2 sodiums get pumped out. So these are going to reestablish through that sodium-potassium pump. Okay, so this shows the same thing, just in a different graph. I'm just going to talk us through it. So here we are at our resting potential. And the resting potential is -70, so nothing's happening here. So let's say a stimulus gets received by the dendrites of the nerve cell. This causes those sodium channels to open, which is what we see here. And when the sodium channels open, if we get enough of them open, we can go from -70 to -55. Once we get to -55, because enough of that sodium has rushed in, then the action potential is going to happen. You're going to get full depolarization. Okay, and depolarization is going to bring us all the way up to +30. Okay, and that's just more sodium channels opening, sodium influx into the interior of the cell, completes depolarization. Okay, eventually those sodium channels are now going to close here, and the potassium channels will open. And when the potassium channels open, the potassium they open after the sodium because they're much slower to open. Okay, this is going to kind of drive the system back to neutrality, where with the sodium rushing in, the potassium rushing out. Okay. The repolarization takes place because we do active transport. We pump that sodium in. We pump the sodium, in, and the pump the potassium out. Okay, repolarization ends up going past our resting potential to -90, and that's called hyperrepolarization. Hyperrepolarization is necessary because it means that this membrane can't repolarize. It prevents the neuron from receiving another, basically, stimulus during that time. And if it does receive another stimulus, it's got to be a huge one because you have to depolarize even more. Okay, so it assures basically hyperrepolarization assures that the signal only goes in one direction. Okay, this synaptic cleft is just a review because we've already done this with the muscle system. So here we've got looks like a dendrite, axon, and this axon is going to send a signal to this dendrite. So the axon of one neuron is going to communicate with the dendrite of another one. And when the action potential comes down the axon, as it travels down it, remember this whole situation where you get these vesicles with neurotransmitters, and those neurotransmitters, or the vesicles, fuse with the membrane, and neurotransmitters get released, and they bind to this ion channel, and then that's what's going to allow the sodium to rush in. So same thing as before. Impulse processing, we have convergence. Convergent means one neuron receives input from two or more others, and that allows for a threshold stimulus. So convergence, you get one neuron gets a signal from two or more others, and that helps you reach the threshold stimulus. Divergence is when several neurons are stimulated by one. Okay, you get several neurons stimulated by one. So divergence would be more like you want to have a forceful contraction. So you have this one neuron, So you got this one neuron, and it's going to send its signal out to many other ones, and that's divergence. Whereas convergence, you have one neuron, this one receives signals from many or two more others. All right, this one we're just going to go through the neurotransmitters. First one, acetylcholine, which we've talked about before. Acetylcholine, remember, is the neurotransmitter that we use for skeletal muscles. But it's also involved with arousal, like waking up, attention, memory, motivation, movement. Sometimes the degeneration of neurons that use acetylcholine, or that produce acetylcholine, I should say, have been linked to Alzheimer's disease. If you have too much acetylcholine, you can have spasms, tremors, and too little, you can have paralysis. Dopamine. Dopamine is, it's in a lot of things, a lot of behaviors and emotions, but dopamine is one of the pleasure neurotransmitters and has been implicated in schizophrenia and perhaps even Parkinson's disease. Serotonin. Serotonin has been an issue with, or shown to be associated, low levels of serotonin issues with depression, but it is involved with regulation of sleep. You can buy serotonin over the counter now. You can buy it at Walmart if you want to. Dreamy mood, eating pain, and aggressive behavior. Next, norepinephrine affects arousal, wakefulness. Arousal, like waking up, wakefulness, staying awake, learning, memory, and mood. Okay, and it's also one of those fight or flight hormones. Endorphins involved in inhibition of pain. So these may be responsible for that runner's high that people get when they run. It's released during exercise or during strenuous exercise. So that's why it may be involved with that. Glutamate. Glutamate is an important neurotransmitter for things like long-term memory and perception of pain. GABA. GABA is a neurotransmitter. GABA, you don't have to know, but GABA stands for gamma aminobutyric acid. People who have low levels of GABA sometimes have extreme anxiety, but it's mainly an inhibitory neurotransmitter, and involved with sleep and eating disorders. Glycine is a neurotransmitter. And it's another one of those inhibitory ones for brain, spinal cord, lower brain cells. So it helps to block signals there.